The snow fell thick and fast over Chicago that Christmas Eve, blanketing the bustling streets with a quiet, pristine stillness. The city, so often defined by its relentless pace, seemed to slow under the weight of the storm. Holiday lights flickered against the falling snow, their golden glow casting a warmth that belied the biting cold. The air was filled with the sounds of the season, carolers singing on corners, the jingling of bells, and the occasional laughter of bundled-up families rushing home. But Ethan Bennett, seated in the back of his sleek black car, barely noticed. His focus was elsewhere, locked on the financial reports glowing on his tablet screen. As the CEO of Bennett Tech, one of the world's most powerful technology companies, Ethan had no time for the holidays. He had long traded joy for ambition, personal connection for professional success. His life was a constant calculation, deals to close, competitors to outpace, markets to dominate. Even the holiday cheer that enveloped the city felt distant, a distraction he had no interest in indulging. The car slowed as it approached an intersection, the sound of snow crunching under tires breaking Ethan's concentration. He glanced out the window, the frosty streets reflecting in his sharp, tired eyes. And that's when he saw her. A woman stood on the corner, holding a child in her arms. Her thin coat was woefully inadequate against the bitter wind, her posture hunched as if trying to shield the little girl from the worst of the cold. The child, no older than 4 or 5, clung to her mother's neck, her tiny face half buried in the collar of the woman's coat. They were both shivering, their breath visible in the icy air. Ethan's chest tightened as he took in the scene. He was no stranger to the sight of the homeless in Chicago, an unfortunate reality of the city. But there was something about this woman, something that stirred an emotion he couldn't quite place. Her face, though worn with exhaustion, held a quiet dignity. She wasn't asking for help. She wasn't begging. She was simply enduring, holding her child as if her very presence could keep them both safe. "Stop the car," Ethan said suddenly, his voice startling his driver. "Sir?" the driver asked, glancing at him through the rearview mirror. "Stop," Ethan repeated, his tone firmer this time. The car rolled to a halt, and before Ethan could second-guess himself, he stepped out into the storm. The cold hit him instantly, sharp and unforgiving, but he ignored it as he approached the woman. Her eyes darted to him, wary and cautious. As he came closer, "Excuse me," Ethan said, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Are you all right?" The woman stiffened, her grip tightening on her daughter. "We're fine," she replied, her voice soft but guarded. "Just trying to stay warm." Ethan hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. He wasn't used to situations like this, where there were no contracts to negotiate or outcomes to predict. But something about her vulnerability, the silent strength she exuded despite her circumstances, compelled him to act. "You shouldn't be out here in this storm," he said, his tone gentler now. "Please, let me help you. I can take you somewhere safe." The woman's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering across her face. "Why would you do that?" she asked, her voice tinged with both skepticism and desperation. Ethan paused, caught off guard by the question. He didn't have a clear answer. Maybe it was the way she held her child so protectively. Or maybe it was the ghost of his own past, the years when he had struggled before building his empire. Whatever the reason, he couldn't walk away. "Because no one should be out here tonight," he said simply, "especially not with a child." The woman looked at him for a long moment, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded, her movements hesitant but resolute. "All right," she said, "but just for tonight." Ethan led them to the car, holding the door open as she climbed in, her daughter still clinging to her neck. The warmth of the vehicle enveloped them, and the little girl let out a soft sigh of relief as her shivering subsided. Ethan followed them in, his driver glancing back with a questioning look. "Take us home," Ethan instructed, his voice firm. As the car began to move, Ethan turned his attention back to the woman. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah," she said quietly. "And this is Mia." Ethan nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Nice to meet you." "Sarah, I'm Ethan." Sarah didn't respond, her focus entirely on Mia, who had started to drift off in her arms. Ethan watched them in silence, his mind racing. What had brought them to this point? What kind of life had they endured to end up on the streets in the middle of a storm? He wanted to ask, but knew better than to pry. For now, it was enough that they were safe. The car pulled up to Ethan's mansion, its towering glass facade standing stark against the snowy backdrop. As they stepped inside, the warmth of the house was immediate, a stark contrast to the freezing streets they had left behind. Sarah paused in the entryway, her eyes wide as she took in the grandeur of the space, the high ceilings, the gleaming marble floors, the elegant chandelier casting a soft glow overhead. This is your home?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," Ethan said simply. "Come in. You can rest here tonight." Sarah hesitated, clutching Mia tightly. "This is too much," she murmured. "I can't. I don't belong here." "It's just for tonight," Ethan assured her. "You don't have to explain anything. Just make yourself comfortable." With visible reluctance, Sarah stepped further inside, her movements cautious as if afraid to touch anything. Ethan guided her to a guest room, the soft glow of the bedside lamp illuminating the space. "You can stay here," he said. "There's a bathroom through that door, and fresh towels in the cabinet. If you need anything, just let me know." Sarah nodded, her gratitude evident but unspoken. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan left them to settle in, retreating to his own room. As he closed the door behind him, he couldn't shake the strange sensation that had settled in his chest, a mix of empathy, curiosity, and something he couldn't quite name. For years, he had built walls around himself, keeping the world at arm's length. But tonight, for reasons he didn't fully understand, those walls had cracked. As the storm raged on outside, Ethan lay awake, his thoughts consumed by the woman and child now sleeping under his roof. He had spent so much of his life chasing success, believing it would bring him fulfillment. Yet in the simple act of helping two strangers, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan Bennett wondered if there might be more to life than the empire he had built. Ethan Bennett woke to the sound of faint laughter, something that had long been absent from the halls of his mansion. At first, he thought he was dreaming, but as he pulled himself out of bed and walked toward the sound, he realized it was real. He followed the soft giggles down the hallway, stopping just outside the guest room. Peeking in, he saw Mia sitting on the bed, a bright smile lighting her face as Sarah playfully tickled her. The child's laughter was infectious, and even Sarah's normally weary expression had softened. For a moment, Ethan stood frozen, watching the small, intimate moment between mother and daughter. He felt an unfamiliar warmth stir in his chest, a pang of longing for something he couldn't quite name. "Good morning," he said, stepping into the room. Both Sarah and Mia looked up, startled but not unhappy to see him. "Morning," Sarah replied, her tone cautious. "Thank you again for letting us stay the night." Ethan waved off her gratitude. "It's nothing. Are you hungry? Breakfast is ready." Sarah hesitated, but Mia's eyes lit up at the mention of food. Taking the girl's hand, Sarah followed Ethan to the dining room, where a spread of eggs, toast, and fruit had been laid out by the staff. Ethan gestured for them to sit, pouring coffee for Sarah and orange juice for Mia. As they ate, Ethan tried to make conversation, though Sarah remained guarded. She answered his questions politely, but offered little about herself. Mia, however, was less reserved. Between bites of toast, she chattered about her favorite cartoons and how much she loved pancakes. Her innocence a stark contrast to the tension Ethan sensed in Sarah. "Do you live here all by yourself?" Mia asked, her big eyes scanning the room. "Yes," Ethan replied with a faint smile. "It's just me." Mia frowned, tilting her head. "Don't you get lonely?" Ethan's smile faltered, the child's blunt question hitting closer to home than he cared to admit. "Sometimes," he said honestly. Later that day, Ethan found himself in his office, unable to focus on the work in front of him. His thoughts kept drifting back to Sarah and Mia. He had brought them into his home on impulse. But now that they were here, he couldn't ignore the questions swirling in his mind. Who was Sarah? What had led her to such hardship? And why did he feel so compelled to help her? Against his better judgment, Ethan picked up his phone and made a call. "I need you to look into someone for me," he said, his voice low. "Her name is Sarah, and she has a young daughter, Mia. I don't have a last name, but they've been homeless in the city. Find out whatever you can." The investigator on the other end of the line promised to get back to him within a day. And Ethan hung up, feeling a pang of guilt. He told himself it was a precaution, that he had to protect himself from potential deception. Yet, deep down, he knew it was more than that. He was searching for reassurance, a way to validate the trust he wanted to place in her. That evening, as the snowstorm began to clear, Ethan found Sarah sitting by the large bay window in the living room. She was wrapped in a borrowed blanket, staring out at the city lights with a distant expression. Mia was asleep on the couch, her small body curled up under another blanket. "Is everything all right?" Ethan asked, sitting down across from her. Sarah turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "I'm not sure why you're doing this," she said softly. "Men like you don't usually notice people like me." Ethan felt a stab of shame at her words, though he knew they weren't meant as an accusation. "Maybe that's the problem," he said. "Maybe I haven't noticed enough." Sarah gave him a skeptical look, but didn't push further. Instead, she turned her gaze back to the window. "I used to have a life," she said after a long pause. "A job, an apartment, everything. But then things fell apart. Mia's father, he left when she was born. And when I lost my job, everything else went with it." Ethan stayed silent, sensing that this wasn't a story she often shared. "I tried everything," Sarah continued, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. "Shelters, odd jobs, anything to keep us going. But it's never enough. I've spent the past year trying to protect Mia from all of it. But it's hard, so hard." Ethan's chest tightened as he listened. Her story was one of resilience, of a mother's unyielding love for her child. It made his own problems, the isolation, the emptiness he often felt, seem trivial in comparison. "You've done more than most people could," he said quietly. "Mia is lucky to have you." Sarah met his gaze, her eyes glistening. "Thank you. But sometimes, it doesn't feel like enough." The next morning, the investigator called back. Ethan's stomach twisted as he answered, unsure of what he hoped to hear. "Her name is Sarah Harper," the investigator began. "She worked as a nurse before losing her job due to hospital budget cuts. There's no criminal record, no history of deception. Everything she told you checks out." Ethan felt a wave of relief, followed quickly by a pang of guilt. He had doubted her, assumed the worst without giving her the benefit of the doubt. Her story was real, her struggles genuine, and he had let his insecurities cloud his judgment. He hung up the phone, his mind racing. Sarah had trusted him enough to stay in his home, to share her story, and he had betrayed that trust by questioning her intentions. The realization hit him like a blow, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt ashamed, not of his actions, but of the person he had become. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't change the past, but he could make things right. And Ethan Bennett, stood outside Sarah Harper's modest apartment, his breath visible in the chilly morning air. He had spent the last 2 days rehearsing what he would say, turning over every word in his mind until it lost meaning. Now, as he stood on her doorstep, the weight of his guilt and determination felt heavier than ever. He knocked softly, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing Sarah's cautious face. She looked surprised to see him, but kept her expression guarded. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady. "What are you doing here?" "I came to apologize," he replied, his tone sincere. "Can I come in?" Sarah hesitated, glancing over her shoulder, before stepping aside to let him enter. The apartment was small but clean, with toys neatly stacked in one corner and a faint scent of lavender in the air. Mia was sitting on the floor, coloring in a picture book. When she saw Ethan, her face lit up. "Hi, Mr. Ethan," she called out, waving her crayon enthusiastically. Ethan smiled, his heart softening at her innocent joy. "Hi, Mia." Sarah closed the door and crossed her arms, leaning against the wall. "What is it you need to apologize for?" Ethan took a deep breath. meeting her gaze, for doubting you, for questioning your intentions when all you've done is try to protect your daughter. I let my insecurities get the better of me, and I shouldn't have. You deserved better from me. Sarah's posture relaxed slightly, but her eyes remained cautious. Why did you doubt me? I've spent so much of my life surrounded by people who only see me as a means to an end. Ethan admitted, I thought I had to protect myself, even when there was no reason to. I see that now, and I hate that I let my own issues cloud my judgment. Sarah studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she sighed, her shoulders dropping. It hurt, she said honestly, to think that you didn't trust me. But I understand. Life hasn't been kind to either of us. Ethan nodded, his chest tightening. I don't expect forgiveness, Sarah, but I want to make things right. For you and Mia. What does that mean? She asked, her voice cautious. It means I want to help. Ethan said earnestly, not just with shelter or food, but with whatever you need to get back on your feet. A job, childcare, education, whatever it takes to give you the stability you deserve. And I want to be there for Mia, too. I want to be someone she can count on. Sarah's eyes softened, and for the first time, Ethan saw the hint of a smile. You really mean that? Yes, Ethan said, his voice unwavering. You've shown me what real strength looks like. Sarah, I want to honor that. Over the next few weeks, Ethan kept his promise. He helped Sarah enroll in a program to renew her nursing license, covering the costs and arranging for flexible childcare so she could focus on her studies. He also introduced her to contacts in his company's healthcare division, paving the way for potential job opportunities once she completed the program. For Mia, he ensured that her days were filled with warmth and laughter. He took her to the park, taught her how to ice skate, and even set up a small Christmas tree in her apartment, complete with twinkling lights and presents underneath. Her giggles became a constant presence in Ethan's life, filling the void he hadn't realized was so deep. Sarah, meanwhile, began to trust him more with each passing day. She saw the sincerity in his actions, the effort he put into helping without overstepping her boundaries. Slowly but surely, the walls she had built around herself began to come down. On Christmas morning, Ethan invited Sarah and Mia to his mansion for a holiday breakfast. The once cold house was now filled with warmth, decorated with garlands, stockings, and the soft glow of a crackling fire. Mia's excitement was infectious as she tore open her presents, her laughter echoing through the grand hall. As Ethan watched her, he felt a profound sense of peace. For the first time, the mansion didn't feel empty. It felt like a home. After breakfast, as Mia played with her new toys, Ethan and Sarah stepped onto the balcony. The snow-covered city stretched out before them, sparkling in the winter sunlight. I never thought I'd feel this way again, Sarah admitted, her voice soft, safe, hopeful. Ethan turned to her, his heart full. You've given me that, too. I didn't know how much I needed this, how much I needed you and Mia until you came into my life. Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. You've done so much for us. Ethan, I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, he said, his voice steady. Being with you and Mia is all the thanks I need. For a moment, they stood in silence, the crisp air carrying the sounds of the city below. Then, tentatively, Ethan reached for Sarah's hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she laced her fingers with his, a small but powerful gesture that spoke volumes. In the months that followed, their lives began to intertwine in ways neither of them had expected. Sarah completed her nursing program and found a job that allowed her to provide for Mia without fear of instability. Ethan, inspired by Sarah's resilience, restructured his company's charitable arm to focus on initiatives that supported single parents and underprivileged families. Their relationship deepened, built on a foundation of trust, respect, and a shared understanding of life struggles. For Ethan, Sarah and Mia became more than just a second chance. They became his family, the missing piece of a puzzle he had spent his entire life trying to solve. On the next Christmas Eve, as the snow fell softly outside, Ethan stood by the fire, holding Mia in his arms while Sarah leaned against his shoulder. The once empty mansion was now filled with love, laughter, and the kind of warmth that couldn't be bought. Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment he had never known. He had built an empire, but it was Sarah and Mia who had shown him what truly mattered. And as they stood together, watching the snow settle over the city, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, a life filled with love, hope, and the promise of a brighter future.